Lawsuits against the police are one of the best ways to get justice if you've been the victim of police brutality or misconduct. Black communities are frequent targets for police abuse, and rarely is anything ever done about it. Police officers who violate citizens' rights are rarely charged and convicted, and they're disciplined even less of the time. And what ends up happening is that this cycle of police abuse in black communities continues like it's normal. No one thinks twice when they see a young black man being stopped and frisked by the police. Black men are arrested all the time by police officers who use excessive force to take them into custody. It's gotten to the point where police abuse against black people has become normalized. It's common. I've had people tell me that they didn't even know they could complain, much less file a lawsuit for compensation and justice. They've been the victim of police abuse so many times, or they've seen it so often in their community that complaining seemed hopeless, and filing a lawsuit seemed like a pipe dream. But that's not true. I've been involved in hundreds of civil rights lawsuits, and I can tell you that lawsuits against the police are one of the best ways to get justice if you've been the victim of police misconduct. There are so many laws and policies in place to protect cops who violate citizens' rights. Almost never will you get justice by filing a formal complaint with the police department. Police departments go to great lengths to protect their own. But with the lawsuit, you take the ball out of their court and make them answer in a court of law for what they did to you. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be easy, because it's not. Cities and police departments fight these lawsuits hard, and they don't go down without a fight. But filing a lawsuit is still one of the best ways to get justice if you've been the victim of police misconduct. So you're probably wondering, how do I go about suing the police for violating my rights? Or maybe you're thinking, what is a civil rights lawsuit? Here's a short version of what was a decades-long fight to get black people the right to be able to sue the police. So after the Civil War, Congress enacted Section 1983 of the Civil Rights Act of 1871. This was what was known as the Ku Klux Klan Act. During this time, black people were being terrorized by the Klan, and the police weren't doing anything about it. And Congress wanted to provide a way for black people to enforce their constitutional rights. So they came up with Section 1983, which provided a way to sue in federal court if your rights were being violated by government officials. But it wasn't that simple. Even though Section 1983 was enacted in 1871 by the 42nd Congress, it was not used for its intended purpose. As with most things in U.S. history with black people, it didn't go as planned. The U.S. Supreme Court did not allow black people to use a law as intended. This is not surprising given that the court has historically been hostile to the rights of black citizens anytime black people raise the argument that the Constitution should apply to them just as it applies to other citizens. The Supreme Court has consistently sided against black people at every turn. From saying that a black person has no rights that a white person is bound to respect in the 1857 Dred Scott case, to allowing segregation in Plessy v. Ferguson in 1896, to even saying that it's lawful to stop and frisk black people in a case called Terry v. Ohio. The Supreme Court has not been on black citizens' side. But something changed in 1961, and you can thank the Chicago Police Department for the right to sue the police in federal court. The Supreme Court had resisted efforts to allow black citizens the right to sue the police officers under Section 1983 for over 90 years. But the Chicago Police Department's record of brutalizing and mistreating black people made the court do a sudden reversal. In the middle of the night on October 29, 1958, Chicago police officers came to the home of the Monroes, a black family that lived on the west side of Chicago. James Monroe and his family were asleep in their beds. A white woman had claimed that James Monroe had taken her husband's life. She had lied. It was actually her lover that she was having an affair with. The Chicago police assembled a team led by an officer named Frank Pape. He was the John Burge of his era. He actually might have been worse than Burge. Pape and other officers came to the Monroe's house. Mr. Monroe and his family were awakened out of the bed, and the police proceeded to beat Mr. Monroe as his children and family watched. Mr. Monroe was then taken to the police station and beaten some more. After it was revealed that the wife had made the story up, Mr. Monroe was let go with no apology. The Monroes filed a lawsuit against Frank Pape for violating his rights. They used Section 1983 of the Civil Rights Act of 1871. Now, initially, their case was dismissed. When they appealed it to the U.S. Supreme Court, the court ruled that the kind of brutality that the Chicago Police Department engaged in necessitated that citizens be able to sue police officers in federal court under Section 1983. This was stunning at the time because the court had previously said no for over 90 years. But because of the abuse that the city of Chicago and its police department was inflicted on its black population, it had to change course. Remember how the country was outraged in the aftermath of the Laquan McDonald police shooting, and the Department of Justice opened an investigation into the CPD and found that it had a pattern and practice of violating the rights of black citizens? But the truth is that the Chicago police had been doing that to black people for close to a century. A report on race relations in Chicago written in 1919 found that the police routinely abused and mistreated black people. That's 30 years before Frank Pape broke into the Monroe's house, and 98 years before the DOJ found that the police violated black citizens' rights. As I've always said, police injustice against black people is not new. We're seeing old and rehearsed injustices being done over and over and over again. So now that we know how black people got the right to sue the police, let me tell you what some of the most common claims are that are filed against the police. I want to start by saying that these are not all of the legal claims that can be filed against the police. These are just some of the most frequently filed. Excessive force cases are by far the most common civil rights lawsuits filed against the police. Excessive force is any force a police officer uses that is more than necessary to take a person into custody. So the police cannot do any and everything to make an arrest or to stop a suspect. The law says that the police must use force that is reasonable given the situation they are faced with. Now, black communities suffer from excessive force the most. When the Department of Justice investigated the Chicago police, it found that the officers were 10 times more likely to use force on a black person than a white person. So this would explain why between 2010 and 2020, Chicago paid over $157 million to victims of excessive force. This includes the $5 million paid to Laquan McDonald's family and the $4.5 million paid to the family of Rokia Boyd, a 22-year-old unarmed black woman who lost her life at the hands of a police officer in Chicago. After excessive force, the most common civil rights claim brought against the police are lawsuits for false arrest. The Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution protects citizens from unreasonable seizures. That includes unreasonable arrests. So the police must have probable cause before arresting someone. That means they must have sufficient information to believe that a crime has been committed at the time of arrest. False arrest cases involve police arresting someone without probable cause. They can also encompass cases where the police violated someone's due process rights by fabricating evidence to convict a person and maliciously prosecuting them. In addition to the $157 million Chicago paid to victims of excessive force, since 2010, Chicago has paid over $300 million to citizens that its police department has falsely arrested and wrongfully convicted. That includes the $25 million Chicago recently paid to Tyrone Hood and Marshall Morgan for the decades they spent in prison for a crime they didn't commit. In 1993, Chicago police fabricated evidence against them and coerced witnesses to testify. There's also John Burge, the corrupt Chicago cop that tortured and framed dozens of black men in Chicago. He's cost the taxpayers close to $200 million for wrongful conviction cases. There's another cop in the last 4 years, Reynaldo Guevara, also accused of sending countless black and Hispanic men to prison for crimes they didn't commit. He's cost taxpayers close to $40 million. But it's not just the large settlements and verdicts that make up the more than $300 million Chicago has spent on false arrest-related cases since 2010. There are hundreds of cases where people receive smaller amounts after they were falsely arrested by the Chicago police. In 2010, 2 black Navy veterans were detained and arrested 1 block from their house because they looked suspicious. They received a $65,000 settlement. A few years ago, I helped a young black kid get a 6-figure settlement after he was falsely arrested for a string of robberies he didn't commit. The Chicago police coerced a witness to identify him as a suspect. Another common claim filed against the police in civil rights lawsuits is the failure to provide medical care to people in police custody. The police must provide medical care and attention to anyone in their custody that is injured or requesting medical help. Because the police have temporarily deprived someone of their freedom by arresting or detaining them, they must also ensure that person's safety while in custody, and that includes providing medical care when needed. Many times, people die in police custody because the police were not properly supervising the individual, or the person requested medical help and the police denied their request. Denial of medical care claims are some of the most serious civil rights violations because they can lead to horrific consequences. Recently, a black man named Richard Cox received a $45 million settlement. This was the largest police misconduct settlement in history, after he was paralyzed by police officers in New Haven, Connecticut. One of the claims he made in his lawsuit is that the police failed to give him medical care after they paralyzed him. Sandra Bland died in police custody in 2015. Her family received $1.9 million to settle their civil rights lawsuit. One of the claims they made was that the jail failed to provide Sandra with proper medical care and attention. These are not all of the claims you can bring against the police in a civil rights lawsuit. There are many more that I didn't talk about in this video. But no matter the legal claim, black and Hispanic people deserve to be treated with dignity and respect by the police. And for far too long, black and brown people have been the victims of police abuse. But you don't have to be just a victim. You have rights, and you should use them.